Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My name is Skylar Woon, and it is my honor to introduce two powerful women with us today, our distinguished speaker and our moderator for today's session. Today, we are honored to welcome our guest speaker, Her Excellency, Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. As Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani helped stabilize Indonesia's macroeconomy, manage the nation's debt, and increase trust of investors, among numerous other accomplishments. Prior to her appointment as Ministry of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani served as the Executive Director of the International Monetary Fund and Managing Director of the World Bank Group. Minister Mulyani has won multiple awards for Best Minister of Finance, and in 2018, the World Government Summit announced her to be the best minister in the world. Our moderator for today is Ms. Lesly Goh, former Chief Technology Officer for the World Bank Group and one of our very own HPAIR advisors. She brings an extensive international experience in the private and public sector, advising government policymakers on the regulatory implications from emerging technologies at the intersection of technology innovation and policy frameworks. In addition, Ms. Goh holds numerous academic affiliations and board positions. For members of the audience, please feel free to include any questions into the Q&A section as the session is progressing. Also, please include the country you are from so that we can give some more context to your question. Towards the end of the session, our team will select some of your questions for Ms. Goh to ask Minister Sri Mulyani. And with that, now it is my honor to pass the floor to Ms. Lesly Goh.
Thank you so much, Skylar, and I really appreciate all the hard work that the HPAIR organizing team has done. And hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. I miss all of you. And today, we're very excited to have this fireside chat with our esteemed speaker, Her Excellency Minister Sri Mulyani. Welcome. We're truly honored that you, thank you. We are truly honored that you can be joining us today. I hold you with the highest esteem since the first time we met at the World Bank IMF annual meeting in Bali 2018. Subsequently, we continue supporting you at in the digital transformation journey. And you are the role model for many women and men who aspire to be in government and join the multilateral development institutions. This has been a painful and difficult experience globally as we deal with the COVID-19 impact on economic, social, physical, mental stress for all around the world in the last 1.5 years. Our heart goes to those in hardship and pray for good health and safety for people in Indonesia. It is remarkable to see several government initiatives stepping up the effort to address the crisis. No doubt it will take some time to see the impact for a large country such as Indonesia. For instance, I learned about the measures and policies reform to transform education outcome from Minister Nadiem in our fireside chat at this conference recently. I also learned about Minister Budi, who spoke about the 6 reforms to radically transform health outcome in a recent World Bank event called Beyond Unicorns. So over to you, Your Excellency, to speak about the experience so far during the pandemic.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. It's really good to see you again. And of course, it's also an honor for me to join this meeting as well as summit. I do hope that our experience can provide a lot of lessons that can be learned by many in this case. We are facing indeed an extraordinary situation. Not only that the pandemic COVID, which is now entering the 2nd year, and even in many places in the world, we are now facing with a new variant, which is definitely also creating a new challenge for many policymakers, even though we are now already, some of the population has already received vaccination. So it is really a very, very challenging task for many policymakers, but also for the people around the world. And at the same time, of course, we are not only dealing with the COVID, which threatening the safety of the people, but also the implication of this pandemic to the social, economic, and financial. Many countries in the world, certainly, because they have to address the issue of COVID through increasing the movement of the people in order for them to avoid the spreading of this virus, that has an implication, very serious one, to the economic activity. And that can be seen from the contraction of the economy from many countries in the world. Indonesia has suffered minus 5.3% in the second quarter last year, when we just initially have this pandemic and have to really almost close down all the activities. Today, we've already recovered with the second quarter of this year, growth by 7.07%. So 12 months later, we can recover. But certainly, it's not a one smooth journey. It is a lot of challenging situation that we really have to sometimes have to maneuver and change the policy, because the virus is keep changing, the variant as well as the way they are transmitted. So how the country responding to this very specific situation? Of course, we use all the policy and instrument in hand. In this case, the fiscal policy, other Minister of Finance play a very, very significant role. All countries doing the counter-cyclical, Indonesia also doing the same. Traditionally, Indonesia will not allow to have government have a deficit above 3% of GDP in one particular fiscal year. With this pandemic, because of the economic situation is being halted, and therefore the revenue of the tax is going to also decline or already suffer. Last year, we actually have a 14.7% of our tax revenue contracted, while the spending for health, for social safety net, for stimulating the economy again is keep increasing. So that's why Indonesia, for the first time after almost 20 years, we are abandoning what we call it fiscal constraint of deficit 3%. But we are very careful not to make this as a totally what you call it new practice of non-disciplined fiscal policy. So we adopted a law, emergency law, which is only providing government for 3 years for us to be able to cope with this pandemic with the fiscal policy with the deficit above 3%. But we are very careful in using this fiscal room provided by the law. First, of course, the deficit has been widened to 6%, a combination of the revenue drop as well as the spending increase, as I mentioned earlier. But the problem is not only just increase in spending, how you are going to spend this new, what you call it, fiscal resources. First is, of course, the health. So health spending, especially for the vaccine and vaccination and the treatment, testing, tracing and treatment is very critical for us to be able to handle the COVID. Luckily, I think Indonesia is relatively low in terms of the number which is affected by the COVID. We are still struggling to reduce the death rate, but it's not really a totally outlier. We are now increasing our testing, tracing, and treatment, as well as the vaccination. With the Delta variant, which is increasing very rapidly in July, now it's already declined also very rapidly within the 5th and 6th week after we are imposing a restriction. Second, we increase significantly the spending for social safety net. The social support, especially for the poorest, but actually the near poor will also receive, because we also see with the declining economic activity, many of the households suffer from declining revenue or income on their family. So we expand our social safety net, not only providing cash transfer, but we also provided, for example, like the electricity subsidy, as well as internet subsidy. Maybe in this case, Minister Nadiem providing the idea regarding education reform. But that's also facilitated by the fact that during this pandemic, we are all forced to use the digital technology to do our activity, education, social, as well as economic, as well as the government. So technology, digital technology is very critical during this pandemic time. We also support the small, medium enterprises for them to be able to not only survive, but they also can recover. And this is the area that we are focusing most during this pandemic. So with all this support, I think we are now gradually see the recovery of our economy. Of course, the challenge ahead is still a lot. As I said, pandemic is really a challenge for a country, but this is a global problem because it is transmitted from country to country. So it cannot be solved by one country. Even if you talk about vaccination, the access to vaccine is going to be very critical. So multilateral cooperation and working together is going to be critical. The same thing for the issue which is equally challenging, that is climate change. That we are all know that this is going to be one of the issue which will face by all countries in the world. They are going to be affected regardless where your location is. This is just like pandemic. Wherever you are going to be affected by this challenge. And that's why global cooperation is going to be very, very critical. Now, Leslie, I'm going to stop here by saying that many times we are going as a countries as well as a nation, that we are all going to be facing the challenge together. Indonesia next year is going to again hold the presidency for the G20. And we want to see the recovery of the economy of all countries together. So we want the recovery to be together and stronger. And that's definitely require a lot of cooperation. And this is not something that taken for granted. A lot of effort need to be actually continue, maintain, as well as effort that need to be allocated for all of us to continue cooperating, because it's not going to be something which is taken for granted. With the geopolitical situation, which is now becoming more complicated, I think we really have to work very hard to make sure that all countries will continue, collaborate, coordinate, and then working together so that the prosperity can be shared by all. So I will finish at this moment, Leslie. I hope this is going to be a good opening for all of us. I'm going to share with you many of the very important detailed challenges of many area that hopefully can be discussed later on.
Wow, that's amazing that under your leadership, I have full confidence in you to bring the path towards recovery for Indonesia and a shining example for many countries around the world. So let's take a little, lessons from the past. During the 2007 to 2010 global recession, under your leadership, Indonesia was one of only a few countries to maintain positive economic growth in 2009. Could you share the reason for the success, and what insights would you share with our audience from such an experience that could help you with today's financial situation from the pandemic?
Thank you, Leslie, for this question. The 2008-2009 situation is totally different from today. Although I think if you look at the manifestation in terms of balance sheet, there is a similarity. 2008-2009 was a global financial crisis. To be exact, actually, United States and European financial crisis. They are driven by the balance sheet problem, especially the balance sheet of financial sector, which I think they are excessively taking risks. And then creating a correction, which then creating also a confidence problem. But because the issue or the problem is in an advanced country, that is the biggest country in the world economically, like United States, as well as a European, and they are also happen to be the center of the financial world. So the transmission or spillover of this global financial crisis felt globally. And that's why for many countries, including Indonesia, emerging country, developing countries, they are all getting the negative spillover from this financial crisis. What is the form of this spillover, negative spillover? First, of course, because of the confidence collapse and also almost paralyzing financial sector, there is a capital outflow for many of emerging developing countries. There is a crisis of confidence. There is also a question regarding whether all other countries, they are facing with the same vulnerability in terms of the financial sector. So what did we do at that very moment? First, for Indonesia, of course, we have to differentiate regarding what is the situation at that time which triggered the crisis, and what is the difference from Indonesia at that very moment. Differentiating will create a little bit, in this case, a signaling as well as confidence, that this is not the same situation like in Indonesia. Of course, at that time, we really have to make sure the stability of the financial sector will be maintained. And at that time, Indonesia also situation is not always easy, because many countries surrounding us then put what they call it blanket guarantee in order to curb or to address the issue of confidence problem. Many people is in panic because of the financial situation, and that's why many countries in our region, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and others, they are all putting blanket guarantee, so that the deposit or the people who save their money in the banking sector is not going to then withdraw the money in a massive way. Indonesia, for political reason at that time, cannot impose a blanket guarantee, and that make Indonesia a little bit in a very vulnerable situation. But we compensate that with a lot of very intensive communication with the industry, with the people. We also, in this case, creating a lot of what you call it a measure in order for us to be able to make sure that banking sector, capital market will continue functioning, although we are suffering for sometimes volatility, which is at that very moment, sometimes the trading has been suspended because they are triggering deviation or volatility in the price. But overall, I think the response is leadership matters, clarity of the policy, both in terms of the objective policy and then how the policy is going to work. And also at the same time, communication with the industry is very important. Stakeholder communication is very critical for us to be able to identify where the vulnerability in the economy is going to be affected most with this global spillover that we are facing. With that, I think we are quite resilient, and also because of the confidence that can be maintained, the contraction of the economy has been mild or can be minimized, and the recovery is actually also quite remarkable. Of course, Indonesia is not doing alone. We also know at that time, 2008, 2009, for example, like China in this case also doing the counter-cyclical. We also did the same thing, counter-cyclical, using fiscal and monetary policy at that time in order for us to be able to compensate the shock coming from outside. And with all this counter-cyclical policy by many developing countries, including and most importantly like China, then the recovery of many emerging countries is actually quite fast. Even at that very moment, I think followed by a year of commodity booming because of demand driven from this counter-cyclical policy coming from many countries which is exercising this policy. So with that, many of the growth can be supported by this counter-cyclical, confidence can be maintained, and Indonesia was actually relatively minimized in terms of the implication. But it was a very, very intense as well as scary for many people actually at that time. Because, you know, Lesly, in Indonesia, we have 97, 98 crisis. So the memory of the people regarding banking crisis is still very fresh. So it was a very, very grim and very difficult and complicated situation. But luckily, we can pass that one.
Well, many thanks for your the great lessons that you've shared with us. And I think that a lot of times what you said, leadership matters a lot. And you also talked about technology, something that's close and dear to my heart. So in your article, Governance for the Future, Asia's Perspective, you wrote about emerging economies must be proactive because they cannot simply allow technological changes to wash over them, leaving citizens to adjust on their own. And you also said in another article with the project and syndicate that developing countries must seize the tech frontier. So what could developing countries do to make the benefits from such technological advances reach their citizens?
Well, Lesly, this is something which also dear to my heart. Before pandemic, we've already discussed quite a lot about Industrial 4.0, digital economy, which is going to affect all the life and livelihood of people. People talking about the artificial intelligence and how this the digital economy is going to take over many of the jobs. And then the question regarding what does it mean from the policy policy in this case, where the revenue for the tax is going to coming from, and how we are going to make sure that the people will be ready for this revolution, that is industrial revolution or technological revolution, which is affecting them. I think this is going to be one of the most important policy challenge for many countries. Then we face with this pandemic, which many at that time, Indonesia including, has been preparing for, or even in this case, starting to formulate and implementing policy in order for us to be able to transform Indonesia economy, citizen, government into a more digital technology, using the digital technology in the way we work. Then we hit by the pandemic. Many of our plan, which actually, for example, in the Ministry of Finance, I will tell you our own experience. We were actually planning to convert into a digital with the timeline of minimum around 3 years, in which all the document within the office will be converted into totally digital. The signature is going to be digital, interaction office, the flexible working office will be transmitted into a more digital, and flexibility is going to be provided as a policy. Then we hit by the pandemic, we cannot go to the office, then we have to change overnight, right? So all the transformation to the digital has been accelerated because of this pandemic. So for Indonesia, it will continue the same. The what you call it, the framework is going to be the citizen, that is the people, the economy, as well as the government, of course. The citizen, not necessarily that they are all equally ready for this kind of digital transformation. So the question is, as in my article in this case, they are not supposed to be just consuming or using, but how they are going to use this technology in a more productive way, or even creating more catalytic role for the innovation, for the productivity. And that's required quite a lot of change. And that's why for Indonesia, what is the change which is really important and strategic? Education, of course. And that's why we have the reform on education. Minister Nadiem, who happened to be also somebody who's very knowledgeable on digital technology, then now has been recruited as a Minister of Education in Indonesia to accelerate this kind of reform. Training, education, interaction, curriculum, content, the way you learn is going to change. And this is already now tested during this pandemic. So it's just accelerating even more. We also see, for example, on a health system, as Minister Budi mentioned in this case, this is going to be one of the most important for us to reform both health, education, and even social safety net. So the people is going to be a player rather than just a passive recipient of this changing of the technology. I think that is the most important. And that will also catalytic in reforming or changing or transforming the economy. So how we are going to transform the economy into a digital economy? It's already happening because of this pandemic. Now many small, medium enterprises, they are all moved into a digital platform and market in order for us to be able to still continue serving the client or the customers in this case. And that's happened especially for the big city. But don't forget, Indonesia is not only Jakarta, which is maybe well in terms of the infrastructure connectivity and so on. Indonesia is a huge country. We have 75,000 villages, which is, I think we still have more than half or 1/3 of the villages, which is not yet connected in a very good quality way. And that's why for Indonesia, we need to develop the second one for transforming the economy in an equal and fair and providing equal access. Infrastructure is very critical. So we invested quite a lot on the digital infrastructure. We built, for example, Palaparing for the connectivity, that is the satellite, 12,148 kilometers for us to be able to connect, and 90 especially cities and districts which is not yet connected in a good quality way will be able to be connected. the satellite is not going to be adequate without the support, for example, from what we call it, the supporting infrastructure on the ground. And that is something that we really have to provide, especially for us to be able to connect those remote area in Indonesia. This is going to be able to then facilitating all the reform in education and health, because then all the primary health services, a school, especially in a remote area, is going to be able to be connected by the internet. And then the reform in education and health can be facilitated when this connection. Also, village in Indonesia, 75,000, as I said earlier, many of them will now be able to be connected. So the government business, in this case, all the administration can be then converted into a digital. This is what we are putting in our development plan until 2024. We do hope by that time we are going to be able to build all the necessary infrastructure for the connectivity, including launching what we call it the multi-function satellite in 2023. This is going to be able to improve what we call it 150 until 300 gigabyte per second facility for people, business, and government to be able to use what we call it a toll road in the sky. We built the toll road, in this case, the real road in this case, which is one of the very important also the development plan, or in this case program under President Jokowi. But we are also building the sky toll road in this case, in which people will be able to connect. So this is going to then complementing all what we call it the design of connectivity in Indonesia. But as I said earlier, also in my paper in this case or article, the infrastructure, hard infrastructure is important, necessary, but not sufficient. I think the most important also the regulation and the ecosystem that need to be built. And this is an area that Indonesia will look in many other countries as a lesson also. I think in IMF World Bank Bali conference, they are providing what you call it a principle for a good regulation. We call it a Bali, what you call it, Bali principle.
Agenda.
Yep. Yeah. So this is an area that we are going to be able to then benchmarking Indonesia with what is the good practice globally in providing us with the right regulatory framework for this digital technology to be able to thrive in Indonesia. Indonesia, as you also know, Lesly, that we are maybe among a few emerging countries in which we have unicorn, which is quite significant. There are 5 at least in this case, and there are many in the lower than unicorn, but they are actually also catching up. So it's really a vibrant economy, millennial, many of the young demographic, which is tech savvy. But we also know that this is not all our population is already prepared for this, what you call it, a digital transformation and revolution. We really have to make sure that no one leaves behind, because they don't have the access, they don't have the ability in terms of the scale and education. So these are all that we are trying to continue focusing, while we are supporting those which is already ready and prepared. We are also taking care for those who still not yet ready, and they need to be supported in order for them to be able to enjoy this kind of revolution. It's not become the victim of the revolution, digital revolution, but they are going to be the player and enjoying it and using it in the most productive way.
That's very comprehensive use of technology in many ways, together with the policy reforms. I am currently supporting the Ministry of Agriculture and helping to connect the government with the private sector in a way to catalyze innovation to help the smallholder farmer. So I really appreciate that the effort that is put in place for connectivity that is so critical. And also the ways where you're talking about the youth, millennial farmers. We are wanting to create this kind of a data hackathon as our initiative to try to catalyze innovation among the young innovators. So stay tuned on that front. And I'm looking forward to moving to Indonesia to bring these programs together with a great community. But I want to also touch upon, you mentioned something about taxation. I heard about digital tax filing and e-services throughout the nation. How does that digitalization of tax system help promote the Indonesian progress and development? And why is it so important for the government? Because I heard you talk a lot about taxation in the past. And with the use of digital technology, I think that brings as an enabler to bring some of the great vision that you have in mind, right?
Yes, tax and the government revenue in general is going to be very critical for us to be able to build what we've already explained, that is on education, health, infrastructure. That can only be delivered if the government have a healthy revenue. And the main important revenue is, of course, coming from the taxation. Indonesia is still actually undergoing a lot of reform on a revenue side, on a taxation, non-tax revenue, which is also equally important because Indonesia also have a non-tax revenue sources, for example, like the royalty of our mining and so on. So the revenue reform is going to be very critical again in many levels. First, on the organization as well as the human resource quality. This is something that we continue, whether you are trained, your staff, and then providing them with a new skill, understanding that the changing of the economy toward digital, and that will require a different attitude for us. We also change the way we work, like the business process, as well as customer or taxpayer relation, in which they are no longer need to go to the tax office in order for them to register, to comply in terms of their tax responsibility. Tax services is going to be provided through the digital technology. So the easiness to pay tax is going to be very critical. So that is not going to be like an excuse for people for them to be able to then comply with this regulation. The third one is, of course, also we are working with many of the digital company in Indonesia as well as global, because Indonesia is a big market. So many of the global digital company operating in Indonesia, like Amazon, Google, they are all Apple in this case, they are all actually providing, investing in Indonesia. They also developing, whether this is on the cloud industry or they are also physically present in Indonesia. If they are not physically present in Indonesia, this is going to create a revenue challenge for us because the traditional law on a taxation globally is only recognizing the physical presence. If the company is not present in your country, they maybe quote unquote can avoid, or they can say that I don't have the obligation to pay tax. And that's not fair because digital technology doesn't require you to be physically present. So I think the G20 OECD agreement on this taxation, global taxation, especially on the digital taxation, is a very great progress, which we are all agree in terms of how you are going to address the issue of digital taxation in a fair way globally, regardless where your location and how you operate. This is going to be also accelerating a lot of reform within a certain economy. Indonesia is no exception. So we really have to be able to continue anticipating this trend of change. So our regulation need to be adjusted, policy need to be also adapted to this new environment. And that's why on the regulatory framework, we are now talking with our parliament on the legislation. We just anticipating. For example, a couple of years ago, we are talking about the access of information, in which all countries can have the access of information regardless where the location of our taxpayer. So all jurisdiction globally should comply with that. That's really good. That's creating a level playing field globally. So Indonesia have to prepare the legislation in order for us to be able to participate in this kind of global practices. And then we are now talking about the digital taxation, in which this nexus between physical presence, economic presence, as well as how you are going to calculate the tax obligation is going to be also within the global arrangement. So Indonesia has to be able to prepare for that kind of situation. So on the legislation and regulatory framework, we have to change also with the human capital, as I mentioned earlier, and organizational, especially the business process and taxpayer services. Of course, the last thing is about how you are going to develop the IT system, just like as I mentioned earlier, because this requires a lot of investment on the system. So we are now developing what we call it the core tax system in Indonesia. This is following many other countries who's already built that kind of tax system, which is going to be one comprehensive process from registration and then payment, and then if there is an examination, and if there is a compliance, and then if you are going to then need to be what you call it settle in terms of your tax obligation. This is going to be in one system, which is going to then have more certainty, because it's not going to be dealt one by one, taxpayer by tax officers, and then that kind of interaction will be very vulnerable to the corruption or any bribery in this case. With the system, then you are going to be able to make sure that the integrity of the interaction with the taxpayer, the integrity of the data, the integrity of the handling or settlement is going to be secure. So both for the taxpayer as well as the tax officer, this is going to be a very good protection for them. So these are all a huge change, fundamental change in many ways, but we are in the middle of this reform. So revenue, not only on the digital economy, but also from the whole economy, is going to be relatively can be enforced in a fair way, certain way, with an efficient way, so that the taxpayer is not going to have to pay a lot of effort in order for them to comply with this taxation. So that is an area which is very critical. At the end, certainly, Lesly, that we want to see the tax revenue in Indonesia improve, so that we are going to be able to continue, as I said earlier, a lot of development agenda is still needed for Indonesia to continue growing from the middle income country, hopefully can become a high income country soon.
That's great. I think you mentioned also a very important topic in your introduction about climate change, and a topic that's close and dear to the heart of many of the young leaders and delegates in this conference. Perhaps combining that with the G20 that Indonesia will be hosting next year in Bali, maybe if we could give us an insight as to how the opportunity will of the hosting of G20 will bring out the topic around climate change adaptation plan.
Well, climate change is definitely, especially for the younger generation, they see it. They now can really look and also examine how this the climate change happen. I mean, the technology allowing them to see how the warmth of the temperature of the global is going to affect all aspect of life. The disaster which is coming from the implication of the climate change. I think they are all getting more and more not only conscious but also aware, and they want to avert this bad trend, if you can call it, the global public bad trend, through policy, through action, to participation. So it's a good to see many of the younger generation. They are not only fully aware, but they also adopting in their daily lifestyle, knowing that everybody can contribute in averting this very bad trend globally. For the country in this case, because just like pandemic, climate change is a global problem. So not only a country or several countries can actually prevent this one. It should be a global coordination and global collaboration. And that's why I think the UNFCCC, they are already, and they are starting, and they are continue facilitating this kind of cooperation. Many study which is showing that the global temperature is already increased. In order for us to avoid 1.5 degrees centigrade, this is going to require all countries to contribute. There is a Paris Agreement on what we call it the national determined contribution, but this is maybe no longer adequate. It needs to be increased in terms of the ambition. But even what we call it the NDC, the national determined contribution, require a lot of resources, whether you are talking about your own resources or global resources. And this is one of the most important and the trickiest part. And I'm chairing with the Finland finance minister on a global finance ministers on a climate change. This is a good platform for us to discuss about how we are going to be able to work together and how this is going to be financed, because that's also very important. A lot of mitigation and adaptation program require money, resources, in order for country to be able to adopt that consistent policy and action that can avoid a global the world from this climate change. And that this is maybe one of the most important and critical issue that is going to be discussed in Glasgow next November, as well as in the next UNFCCC, including the G20 discussion. What is different and now creating more optimism is that United States now on board again, and they are also even now becoming a champion. Even the US and China become the chair of the working group on the climate finance. I think this is going to be very important for us to be able to come up with all aspects of financing on the climate change. It is not only about financing which is coming from the government. The most important is from the private sector, from the industries, financial sector in this case. And that's why a lot of regulatory reform will be required in this case. I think globally now, all financial sector have to adopt the ESG. This is one of the area which is going to be maybe mainstream and becoming even more in terms of how you monitor a certain, what you call it, compliance on this carbon emission. We also need to create more robust, what we call it, the carbon price and carbon market, which is very critical if we are going to use the market mechanism to address the issue of climate change. So if you talk about climate change, this is not only about how the government will spend money to address a certain issue, but government role is still very important. And that's why for us in Indonesia, we also developed what we call it the budget tagging. How much budget that I spend in order to address the issue of climate change, whether this is on adaptation and mitigation. And this is going to be a part of building transparency and consistency, as well as credibility of the commitment with the climate change on the government side. And then if you talk about private sector, then a market mechanism is going to be very critical. How much carbon is going to be priced, how they are going to exchange, whether this kind of market mechanism is going to create a win-win solution without creating a leakage or evasion, which can be actually enjoyed by a certain group of industry or a certain country at the cost of other. I think this is going to be an area which is very critical at this very moment and in the next decade, because we don't have enough time anymore at this moment. There will be no single instrument or policy will be adequate to address the issue of climate change. There will be all instrument and policy and regulation that require to be formulated, from fiscal policy, monetary policy, banking policy, financial sector policy, and even on the real sector, including the lifestyle of the people. So a lot of what you call it stakeholder and within this ecosystem of the climate change need to work together. I'm basically an optimistic person in this case, Lesly. It's a complex but doable if everybody, and I'm sure that with the technology, with the now transparency, I do hope this will create a momentum of change which is going to be very significant.
Well said. I think this is a great example of bringing the public and private sector together in a very important mission for the world. So I want to also now pivot into more of a personal question. You have achieved so much as a global leader in government. and as a global trailblazer for women in public sector and only woman to serve as a Minister of Finance in ASEAN. So reflecting on your journey growing up as a young Indonesian woman, could you share what was the drivers for this career path and what were the key lessons that you learned along the way that could really be useful for our young leaders in this audience?
Well, for me, family is very important. I think this is the formation time that will provide you with a certain character, values, as well as the attitude that will help you to continue growing. I think I'm lucky enough to have a family. My parents, my late father and mother, they both providing an equal opportunity for all their 10 children. We are a big family, an old-fashioned family at that time, Lesly. So my parent providing an equal opportunity for girls and boys. Equally, we are all encouraged to pursue the education at the highest level. Even in this case, my parents always signaling that if you become a professor or lecturer, that is the best profession that they really want, meaning that they are not only talking about that you should continue your education, but you should acquire a knowledge in order for you to be able to share to others. I think that is the most important from the very beginning, that I'm actually brought up with this kind of value. And the second one is, of course, at the same time, many asking, is being a girl or woman matters? Of course, it matters, because you are all know globally, we are all see the gender gap. It is the gap which is constructed whether by the social construction, cultural construction, or even religious construction, political construction, which is creating a lot of what you call it a barrier for a girls or women to be able to participate, whether they are in school, and then after that, after you are finishing school, whether you are going to be able to go to the job or to career, and also in terms of your contribution to the society or economy. And for me, I'm lucky enough because you always like a lot can be said that there are a lot of where you got excuse for you not to continue. But I was actually provided by a real example. My mother with 10 children, she can pursue her education up to the highest level. She is a professor. She was a professor at the university. So there is no reason for you to say that, well, I cannot do it, because I have an example every day in my life during my upbringing. And then I think when you are working, you also have the passion. I think that's very important for all your colleagues. If you are still at the staff level, your superior, your boss knows that you are somebody that they can rely, because he or she is not only working because he or she are only expecting a salary by the end of the month, but he or she providing this kind of passion. That is, you work with your heart. It will show in your quality of work. If you just doing it because somebody told you to do it, or because you are instructed to do it, it's so different when you do something because you really love to do that job. Even though this is like your office job, happen to be, I really always love my job. When I was in the university, I love to teach. When I was in the research institute, I love to do the research. And when I work in the government, I love to do a reform. When I was in the World Bank, I also love to do the reform, as well as doing all the policy, as well as all the activity that I believe is going to help people from the poverty. So it's really coming from your heart that will make whatever that you are going to do or what you are doing is going to be a different. It's the authenticity. It's the strong, what you call it, ownership that is going to make you different. And that definitely then will be recognized in many of your career, that your peer, your boss, your, in this case, stakeholder will recognize you that, oh, he or she will work as a reliable person, somebody that you can rely, competent, professional. And if you make mistake, you admit it. I mean, no one actually perfect in the world. So it's okay to make a mistake. So you don't have to pretend that you always perfect in this case. But if you can genuinely showing that you are learning, you are growing, you are continue improving, I think the society, your peer, the institution will recognize that. And that is going to be something that will then develop your own, whether this is personality, knowledge, as well as your own character. The third one, the last one is that is also important, Leslie, in this case. As I don't know whether this is always a character of woman, but I don't think so. That if you have caring for others, so it's not about you. Wherever you work, whatever that you are doing, it's not about you. It's about others. So that is going to also another very important and powerful in making you to become a person that is going to be like seeing by the society, by your institution as an asset. They love to have you around because it's not only and it's not only about you. It's about us, about the society, about our institution, about the mission that we are going to achieve. And that is something which will really make you difference. I think I'm fortunate enough, as I mentioned earlier, my upbringing, being in a big family, the formation years, my parent education and train us to be that kind of personality, which is never actually about us. It's about us in this case. It's about not me, but it's actually us. And then also caring for others, and then continue pursuing and giving your best in whatever position that you have. I think that will make you more focused on what you're trying to do. My advice to you all, don't be bothered in regarding where you are going to end up. You just enjoy the journey. I mean, I enjoy in every job, task, position that I'm having. And that is going to be creating a much better result, because at least it's you can do a lot of even the hard and most challenging, complicated tasks, but you don't suffer from it. You enjoying it, you growing with this problem, you are becoming even a better person. That is most important, I think. So that's maybe if this advice will help many of you. It's maybe just like a classic advice, but it's true. I mean, being a good person, passionate, caring for other, and not about yourself, I think is very, very important.
I think this is very important advice, and I personally take to heart what you said, because I've seen you over the years rise in so many amazing ways through all these difficult times, and your enduring leadership has been so inspiring for me and many, many women and young girls around the world. So talking about young girls around the world, we have an audience question from Megan in Indonesia. Her question is, Your Excellency, with technology as one of the main drivers in supporting economic growth, are there any specific initiatives to integrate with digital players to maintain Indonesia's economic growth momentum?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we recognize that digital technology is going to be one of the most important driver for continue growing, but not only just growing, the growth which is contributed by higher productivity and better quality of life for people. I think that's very important. How the policy that we are adopting, as I said earlier, is going to be on the citizen side, how to transform the citizen to become a digital citizen. So this is very critical on education, on even now during this COVID time, we have what we call it the Kartu Prakerja, that is the pre-work card, which for those who's losing job or finding job, they actually can apply digitally. all over in Indonesia, and they can get the training, digital training again for all the skill that they want to learn, and the government providing them with the social safety net or cash transfer, because this is like a quasi cash transfer, but also skill improvement. And we have a lot of 100,000 people, a million in this case, people try to apply. And the feedback was actually very good. This is one of example of how we are going to transform. Lesly, you mentioned that you are going to work with the Ministry of Agriculture. This is again for us to be able to attract more younger generation that actually agriculture profession, whether you are in a farmer, is going to be one which can provide you with a lot of opportunity. And with the digital technology, you are going to be able to connect the market. There is a certainty regarding the demand and how you are going to be able to continue responding with the supply side, what kind of product which is really needed. I think the digital technology providing a very efficient market signaling for both sides, the demand as well as the supply side. For producer, whether this is big and small, they actually can read the market easily in this case. And that's why they can respond to that. And of course, then the transaction hopefully can be much more efficient, less distorted. I mean, in the past, when you don't have this digital technology, you really relying on many traders. And that's why many of the transaction is actually has been wasted in between, not really receiving with for those which is really doing the real transaction, that is the supplier and the demander. So this kind of transaction cost is going to be much lower and more efficient with the digital technology. And then another thing on the digital technology, as I mentioned earlier, on the government, you change the government fundamentally in this case, not only in terms of the transparency, like in Ministry of Finance, every month I always providing an information, very detailed, how our budget has been developed, how much revenue I receive from what sources, how much we send for what. So they actually can be easily tracked by the people. So something which is in the past may be complicated, it's so difficult to share, it's maybe even secret. Today is just an open and very transparent. And that will create more, what you call it, trust, confidence, as well as, of course, hopefully a vibrant economic dynamic with this kind of technology. So yeah, digital technology is very important in changing and transforming the people, the business, as well as the government. So it is a very critical, and we should be able to use it in a very wise and positive way. Of course, we have to also make sure that we know the downside risk, like the data, the security of the data, the safety of the system, and maybe also in this case, many of the criminals who try to use this digital technology, we do understand that this is also a downside risk that need to be addressed.
Very well said, because as much as there's all these positive opportunities with technology, and I love your examples of creating jobs on-farm and off-farm in agriculture, but there's also the risk that can come from the misuse and abuse of data. So the data security, data privacy are very important matters, and I know Indonesia is taking good care of it. There's policies and regulations in place to protect the citizens and businesses. Now, I know we're way over on time, but it's such an engaging conversation. I wish we can go on for much longer. I think we need to respect your time constraint because of your busy schedule as well. So I am extremely grateful for your enduring leadership with such grace and integrity as a role model for many young women and men to learn about building resilience in such difficult times. I'm also encouraged to hear about your view on technology and how much you embrace technology in such an authentic way to drive greater efficiency and transparency in government. And by combining the ingenuity and empathy I am hopeful that we can apply technology innovation for a higher purpose. Now, I'm speaking from a personal advocacy as a woman in tech who comes from a very humble beginning in Singapore. I firmly believe that a solid education opens up the mind to the world of possibilities and ultimately the courage to dream big. And I believe that a girl with a big dream will become a woman with a vision to change the world, as you have done so. I'm heartened to also learn about your initiative to address gender dimension and improve the opportunity for girls and women in Indonesia. And your pioneering spirit empowers the young women and young girls to push the boundaries and become the trailblazers like you. So today, I'm so honored to have this opportunity to have a fireside chat with you. And I am going to cherish this very moment. Like you said, do the best you can and the rest will take care of itself. And I believe in karma. And so I'm looking forward to moving to Indonesia and be part of the contribution for the digital economy in Indonesia, and looking forward to Indonesia hosting the G20 next year. So all the best to you, and I hope you stay in good health and stay safe. Terima kasih and selamat tinggal.
Terima kasih, Lesly. Thank you so much for all the audience. I do hope that you are all also blessed by good health and be optimistic. We always actually tested by a lot of challenge, but we are very optimistic and have a confidence to be able to overcome it, especially if we are all working together. Thank you so much for listening. And again, sampai jumpa.